Fiancée mocked my manhood at our engagement dinner, saying gold tier devotion, bargain bin equipment. I slipped the ring off her finger and walked out. Then she sent me an explicit video. So I sent it to her family. Now they're all falling apart. Hey everyone. Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. So to start off, maybe it was a bit petty of me to be honest. Anyway, I'm 29, been with my girlfriend Vivian for 3 years. We're both in finance, met at some mind-numbing corporate conference where the biggest excitement was arguing about quarterly projections over stale bagels and weak coffee. We hit it off pretty fast. She moved into my downtown apartment last year, and 6 months ago I proposed with my grandmother's ring, this beautiful vintage piece that had been in my family for generations. Life was nice. About 18 months into our relationship, during one of those late-night conversations where all walls come down and you're just two people being completely honest with each other, I told Vivian about something from my past, a medical situation from when I was younger that left me with certain physical realities I'd learned to live with, something I'd never shared with any other woman, and I'm not comfortable sharing it online either, even anonymously. This wasn't something minor or trivial. It was a source of deep personal insecurity that had affected my confidence for years. The kind of thing that makes you hesitate before getting intimate with someone new, that makes you wonder if you'll ever find someone who can truly accept you as you are. I'd spent years working through the psychological impact with therapists, learning to accept myself despite my limitations. Vivian's reaction was everything I'd hoped for and more. She was understanding, supportive, gentle in all the right ways. She made me feel like it didn't change anything between us, that real love meant accepting someone completely, flaws, scars, and all. She held me that night and whispered that she loved me exactly as I was, that vulnerability was what made relationships real. That moment sealed our bond in ways I'd never experienced before. It was the foundation of trust that made me believe we could build a life together. But her family was an interesting dynamic to navigate, especially coming from my background where people generally said what they meant. Her father, Theodore, was one of those deeply faithful men who wore his religion like armor against the world. Church every Sunday and Wednesday evening, grace before every meal, biblical quotes for every life situation. He seemed like a genuinely good man with strong moral principles, the kind of person who'd give you the shirt off his back if you needed it. But watching him interact with his wife was genuinely painful. She controlled every aspect of his existence. What he wore to work, how he spent his free time, which friends he was allowed to see, even what food he ordered at restaurants. He'd just nod along and say, "Whatever you think is best, dear," while his wife Carmen made all the decisions. The man had completely surrendered his backbone somewhere along the way, probably worn down by decades of manipulation disguised as marriage. Carmen herself was a piece of work, one of those women who smiled sweetly while sliding knives between your ribs, who treated every conversation like a chess match she was determined to win. She had this way of making comments that sounded supportive on the surface, but left you feeling smaller somehow. Always perfectly dressed, always ready with advice nobody asked for, always positioning herself as the authority on how other people should live their lives. I figured Vivian was different from her mom since she always seemed to roll her eyes at Carmen's controlling behavior during the few family gatherings I'd attended. But apparently I was completely wrong about who she really was underneath. I spent 3 weeks planning our engagement dinner down to every tiny detail. This wasn't just going to be some casual get-together at a chain restaurant. I reserved the private dining room at Meridian's, easily the most exclusive restaurant in the city. I flew Theodore and Carmen in from Phoenix, coordinated schedules with my sister Riley, and my best friend Marcus, arranged transportation, even had the restaurant prepare a special menu featuring Vivian's favorite dishes. I bought a new Tom Ford suit because I wanted everything to be absolutely perfect. The financial investment was significant. I probably spent close to $8,000 on that one evening, but it felt worth it. This was supposed to be one of those milestone moments you remember for the rest of your life. I mean, it's my engagement party. It should be elegant. The night went exactly as planned. 20 people in that private dining room, everyone dressed up and in good spirits. Theodore said grace, talking about marriage and trust, which felt perfect at the time. I kept looking at Vivian across the table, thinking about how lucky I was to have someone who really got me, who knew my worst secrets and loved me anyway. When it came time for toasts, the mood in the room shifted to something more formal and heartfelt. Theodore went first with a speech that honestly moved me to tears. He talked about welcoming me into their family, about how he could see the love between Vivian and me, about God's plan, bringing the right people together at the right time. Riley spoke next, getting a little emotional as she talked about watching me find real happiness again after my divorce. She mentioned how different I seemed with Vivian, how much lighter and more confident I'd become. She talked about childhood memories of me always being the protector, the one who looked out for everyone else, and how it made her happy to see someone finally taking care of me for a change. Marcus kept his toast light but sincere, joking about how I'd finally found someone who could put up with my obsessive spreadsheet organization and my tendency to research every major purchase for 3 months before deciding. Then, Vivian stood up, and I leaned back in my chair with what I'm sure was the biggest, most content grin on my face. I was expecting some sweet story about our journey together, maybe something about how she knew from our first real conversation that I was different from other guys she'd dated. She started normally enough, talking about how we met at that conference, how I'd been the only person there who actually seemed interested in discussing something other than quarterly reports and market projections. She mentioned our first real date at that terrible Italian place downtown, where the waiter spilled red sauce on my white shirt and I'd laughed it off instead of getting angry. I was nodding along, feeling that warm glow of contentment you get when everything in your life feels exactly where it should be. But then something shifted in her expression. The loving smile I'd been expecting slowly twisted into something else entirely, something cold and calculating that I'd never seen before. She raised her glass higher, and the room quieted as everyone prepared to hear what they expected would be a touching declaration of love. Instead, Vivian looked directly at me and said, "Here's to marrying a man who worships me, proof that love really does conquer all, even when the equipment comes in travel size." He was so embarrassed telling me, I nearly sprained my face trying not to laugh. Dead silence for about 2 seconds. Then Carmen starts cackling like it's the funniest thing she's ever heard. Her brother Nathan nearly spits out his drink laughing. Even Theodore chuckles nervously. Guy's so whipped he laughs when his wife laughs, even when he clearly doesn't get the joke. Riley and Marcus sat frozen in their chairs, their faces reflecting the complete horror and disbelief I felt flooding through my system. This woman I'd planned to marry, who I'd trusted with the most vulnerable part of my soul, had just weaponized that trust in front of both our families. She'd taken the moment when I'd been most honest and scared, when I'd literally trembled while telling her about my insecurities, and turned it into entertainment for a room full of people. The cruelty was so calculated, so deliberate, that I almost couldn't process it. What made it worse was the obvious premeditation. This wasn't some slip of the tongue or nervous rambling that came out wrong. She'd planned this moment, rehearsed it, probably discussed it with her mother beforehand. The smirk on her face told me everything I needed to know about how much she was enjoying my pain. I didn't yell or throw anything or make the kind of scene that would have given her ammunition to call me unstable or abusive later. I just pushed back my chair and stood up slowly, every eye in the room tracking my movement. The laughter started dying as people began to realize that something was seriously wrong with what had just happened. I walked around the table to where Vivian still stood, her smirk starting to falter as she watched me approach with an expression she'd never seen before. I took her left hand gently and slipped my grandmother's engagement ring off her finger in one smooth, deliberate motion. Looking directly into her eyes, I said clearly enough for everyone in that room to hear, "You don't deserve this." Then I turned and walked straight out of that dining room, without looking back, ignoring her voice behind me calling, "Oh, come on! It was just a joke! Don't be so sensitive! Where are you going?" On the drive home, I was systematically dismantling every assumption I'd made about our relationship. Had any of it been real? When she'd held me that night after I told her about my condition, had she already been planning ways to use it against me? How many of her friends already knew my secrets because she thought my pain was amusing? By the time I pulled into my parking garage, I knew exactly what I was going to do. This wasn't going to be some messy breakup with crying and begging. This was done, and I was going to handle it like a business transaction. Got to our apartment, which is technically my apartment, and went straight to the closet. Started pulling out every piece of clothing that belonged to her. Dresses, work clothes, that expensive coat I'd bought her for Christmas. Everything went into trash bags. Went room by room clearing out every trace of her. Bathroom stuff, kitchen items, bedroom belongings, everything. Didn't matter if it was expensive or had sentimental value. If it belonged to her, it went straight into trash bags. Took me about 90 minutes to clear out 3 years of shared living. 12 bags total, all tied up and ready to go. Then I sat down and waited. Vivian showed up exactly 47 minutes after I'd walked out of the restaurant. Could hear her in the hallway, fumbling with her key, then the confused rattling when it wouldn't turn. I'd called my building's emergency locksmith while I was packing her stuff. Cost me double for the after-hours service, but it was worth every penny. The pounding started immediately. Loud, frantic knocking like she thought she could break the door down. I know you're in there. Open the door. We need to talk about this. I let her bang for a full 5 minutes before opening it just wide enough to see her face. Makeup smeared from crying, hair messed up from running her hands through it. That panicked look of someone who just realized they'd torched their entire life in one stupid moment. Baby, please, let me explain, she started, her voice already cracking. It was just a stupid joke that came out all wrong. You know I didn't mean anything by it. I was nervous and trying to be funny, and it just sounded worse than I intended. Please don't do this over one mistake. We're done, I said, keeping my voice flat and final. Don't come back. Started to close the door, but she stuck her foot in the gap. Wait. You can't just end 3 years over this. I made a mistake, okay? I admit it. But we can work through this. We can go to counseling. I'll apologize to everyone, whatever you want. Move your foot, I said. No, not until you listen to me. This is insane. You're throwing away everything we built together. I said move your foot. She stared at me for a few seconds, probably hoping to see some crack in my resolve. When she realized I was dead serious, she pulled her foot back. I closed the door and turned the new deadbolt. She kept at it for another 20 minutes. Pounding, pleading, threatening. Tried everything from promises to make it up to me, to threats about the lease and shared possessions. Even claimed she was having some kind of mental breakdown and needed help. I turned on the TV and ignored all of it. Finally, silence. I waited another hour to make sure she was really gone, then started moving the bags. 12 trips down to the street. Could have used the building's service elevator to make it faster, but I wanted to take my time with this. Each bag felt like shedding another piece of dead weight. By 2 a.m., I had them all arranged neatly on the curb, like some kind of art installation about the end of relationships. Went back upstairs, cracked open a soda, and waited by the window. She came back around 3:15 a.m., probably thinking she could catch me when I was tired and emotional. Instead, she found her entire life scattered across the sidewalk in garbage bags. I watched from my bedroom window as she knelt on the concrete in her wrinkled engagement dress, frantically digging through bags and trying to salvage her belongings. She kept looking up at my window with this desperate expression, probably hoping to see some sign that this was all just a dramatic gesture that would blow over by morning. I just stood there watching. She'd chosen to humiliate me in front of 20 people using the most private thing I'd ever shared with her. Now she got to dig through garbage bags in a designer dress at 3 a.m. Seemed fair. She spent almost an hour out there, loading stuff into her car, probably trying to figure out how her perfect evening had turned into this nightmare. Every few minutes she'd look up at my window again, but I never moved from my spot. Just watched her deal with the consequences of her choices. My phone started buzzing at 6 a.m. the next morning, and didn't stop for the next 5 days. Vivian's messages went through all the predictable stages. She kept sending long texts about how I was overreacting, how I'd humiliated her in front of her family by walking out, how I couldn't take a simple joke. She actually tried to claim that I owed her an apology for making a scene at the restaurant. Then came the threats. If you think you can just throw me away like garbage, you're wrong. I know things about you that would destroy your reputation. Everyone at the office, your friends, your family, they'll all know exactly what kind of pathetic excuse for a man you really are. You have 24 hours to call me back, apologize and fix this, or I'll make sure everyone knows your dirty little secrets. The audacity was incredible, but it showed me exactly who she really was underneath all that fake sweetness. I didn't respond to any of that. When that didn't work, she switched to bargaining. Promised she'd never hurt me again, claimed she'd just been nervous and trying to fit in with her family's sense of humor. Offered couples therapy, anger management, whatever I thought would help. Each message just confirmed that I'd made the right decision. This wasn't someone having a momentary lapse in judgment. This was someone revealing their true character under pressure. Carmen called on Tuesday morning, 3 days after the dinner disaster. I'd been expecting this. You really embarrassed Vivian the other night. She started without even saying hello, her voice carrying that condescending tone I'd grown to hate over the years. She was just trying to lighten the mood with a little humor. Married couples tease each other all the time. It's perfectly normal and healthy. Is that what you call it? I asked, keeping my voice neutral while mentally preparing for what was coming. Don't be so dramatic. She's absolutely devastated that you can't take a simple joke. Maybe you should think about whether you're really ready for marriage if you're going to run away at the first little bump in the road. Real men don't abandon their women over hurt feelings. I thought that it was time to find out exactly how deep this rabbit hole went. Carmen, how often do you and Vivian discuss our private life? Well, mothers and daughters talk about everything. It's healthy communication between women. Much better than bottling things up like men always do. Everything meaning what exactly? She actually laughed. That same harsh sound I'd heard at the dinner. Oh, honey, I know all about your challenges. Vivian tells me everything about your relationship, your insecurities, your performance issues. How else can I give her proper guidance about managing a man like you? My stomach turned as the full scope of this betrayal became clear. But I kept my voice steady. What kind of guidance exactly? Someone has to be in charge in a marriage. And it's usually the woman if she's smart about it. Men like you need a firm hand to keep you in line and remind you of your place. Vivian was just establishing the natural order at that dinner, showing everyone who really holds the power in your relationship. That was the puppet master revealing herself completely, admitting to coaching her daughter to humiliate me as some kind of twisted dominance display. I could hear decades of manipulation in her voice, the same techniques she'd probably used to break down Theodore until he was nothing more than a nodding yes man. Carmen, I said, my voice perfectly calm and controlled, I want you to listen very carefully. Your daughter betrayed the most private, vulnerable part of my life for your entertainment. You've been treating my relationship like your personal soap opera, coaching her to humiliate me publicly as some sick power play. I'm not your husband to control Karen. Now wait just a minute. Tell me, I continued, cutting her off before she could start backpedaling. Does Theodore know you've been spending your time discussing another man's intimate details with your daughter? I'm sure he'd love to hear about your healthy communication habits over Sunday dinner. What do you think his church friends would say about their deacon's wife gossiping about private marital matters? The line went dead immediately. That evening, Theodore called. The difference in his voice was striking. This wasn't the dominated, beaten-down husband I'd grown used to seeing at family gatherings. There was pain there, but also something else. Clarity, maybe. I'm so sorry, he managed between labored breaths that suggested he'd been crying. I had no idea what Vivian said until Carmen told me today. We raised her better than that. I promise you, we raised her to respect people, to honor confidences, to treat others with dignity. Theodore, I said gently, because despite everything, I genuinely liked and respected the man underneath all that learned helplessness. Did you think what she said was funny? There was a long pause, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with shame. Number God help me, I laughed, because everyone else was laughing and I thought it was some kind of inside joke between you two. When I realized what actually happened, what she'd really done, I've been sick about it for 3 days. I haven't been able to sleep. I appreciate you calling, but this isn't something I can forgive. I understand, he said quietly. I wanted you to know that's not who we are. That's not who I raised her to be. She's been influencing Vivian in ways I never saw clearly before. I'm starting to see a lot of things I was blind to for too many years. I respected Theodore too much to probe deeper, but I could hear that the man was finally waking up after decades of sleep. Good for him, but I was done with anything that has to do with that family. After these calls, I closed my phone and started to rearrange my life again, removing the toxicity completely from my surroundings. 3 months passed in what felt like a completely different life. I threw myself back into work with renewed focus, started hitting the gym religiously, and began cautiously dating again. Nothing serious, just testing the waters to see if I could trust someone new with even basic emotional intimacy. I thought the whole nightmare was finally behind me, filed away as an expensive lesson about trusting the wrong person. Then I started noticing the whispers at my office. It began subtly, the way workplace gossip always does. Coworkers cutting conversations short when I walked by, meaningful glances exchanged in meetings, the kind of awkward energy that suggests everyone knows something you don't. I chalked it up to paranoia at first, thinking I was still too sensitive after everything that had happened. But the signs became impossible to ignore when people started treating me differently. Not hostile exactly, but with a kind of amused pity that made my skin crawl. My buddy Jake from IT finally pulled me aside during lunch and asked the question I'd been dreading. Dude, is it true what they're saying about you? About your situation? The words hit me like a physical blow. Where did you hear that? Man, it's all over the office. Brett from accounting has been telling everyone who'll listen. Says his new girlfriend gave him all the dirt on you. Real personal stuff. I didn't want to believe it, but he's got details that seem pretty specific. Brett Matthews. Loud, obnoxious. The kind of guy who treated personal information like currency to buy social status. The type who'd never had an original thought in his life, but could repeat gossip with photographic accuracy. And apparently, he was dating Vivian now. The violation felt even worse than the original betrayal. She'd taken my secrets to someone whose entire personality revolved around spreading rumors. Someone who would inevitably turn my private pain into office entertainment. It was like she'd studied how to inflict maximum damage and crafted a plan specifically designed to destroy my professional reputation along with my personal life. I confronted Brett directly the next day, cornering him by the coffee machine during his usual afternoon gossip session with the other small-minded parasites who fed on other people's business. "We need to talk," I said, showing exactly how serious I was. "About what?" He had that look of someone who thought he held all the cards. "About keeping my name out of your mouth." "Hey man, I'm just sharing what I've been told. If you've got issues with your equipment, maybe you shouldn't tell people about it. That's not my fault." The casual cruelty in his voice was exactly what I'd expected from someone like him. "Brett, I'm going to say this once, and I want you to listen carefully. Stop spreading personal information about me, or this becomes a legal problem." He actually laughed, that braying sound that confirmed everything I'd suspected about his character. "Dude, relax. Vivian tells me everything about you. Can't blame me for sharing funny stories with the guys. Maybe if you were more of a man, there wouldn't be so much to laugh about." My hands clenched into fists, and for a split second I considered introducing his face to the coffee machine. The smug look on his face, the casual way he was destroying my reputation. It took everything I had not to grab him by the throat right there in front of everyone. But causing a scene would just give him more ammunition. So I stepped back, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "We'll see who's laughing when my lawyer gets done with you." That night, I called my lawyer, a woman I'd used for various contract reviews who specialized in employment law and personal litigation. I explained the situation in clinical detail, focusing on the harassment, the damage to my professional reputation, and the intentional infliction of emotional distress. She was sympathetic but direct about my options. "We can definitely pursue harassment and defamation claims," she said. "The fact that this involves intimate details shared in confidence makes it even stronger. I'd recommend starting with restraining orders to establish a paper trail. Then we can escalate from there." And I'm not going to lie, I was devastated that night. More about the thought of letting someone that freak and toxic like Vivian enter my life, and about sharing something personal about me to her. By Friday afternoon, Brett and Vivian both had restraining orders served to them at their respective workplaces. The paperwork cited harassment, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and interference with business relationships. I made sure the service was public and embarrassing, timed for maximum disruption and humiliation. Vivian called me that evening from a blocked number, her voice a mixture of rage and panic that suggested she was finally starting to understand the consequences of her actions. "You're ruining my life!" she screamed into the phone. "Brett dumped me because he doesn't want legal drama. I could lose my job over this, all because you can't take a joke." I listened to her rant for exactly 30 seconds, letting her reveal more of her true character with every word, before cutting her off. "Stay away from me. Stop discussing my private life with anyone, or the legal action escalates from here. This is your only warning." I hung up and immediately blocked that number too. Done wasting energy on her psychotic bullshit. Time to let the lawyers handle it from here. 7 days after the restraining orders were served, exactly 1 week to the day, I received a video message from an unknown number while eating lunch at my desk. Thinking it might be work-related correspondence from a client, I opened it without checking the sender information. The first frame showed Vivian's face, flushed and breathing heavily in a way that immediately told me what I was looking at. The camera pulled back to reveal she was doing with Brett in what looked like his cheaply furnished apartment. What followed was 2 minutes of explicit footage that made my stomach turn, not because of the visual content itself, but because of what I could hear in the audio and the obvious intention behind sending it to me. She was looking directly at the camera at several points throughout the video, clearly aware it was recording and performing for my benefit. At the end, while still engaged with Brett, she looked straight into the lens and said my name followed by, "This is what it looks like to be with a real man. Too bad you'll never know what that feels like." The malice was breathtaking. I sat there staring at my phone screen, feeling a level of disgust and betrayal I'd never experienced before. This was the woman I'd planned to marry, who I'd shared my dreams and fears with, who I'd trusted with my heart and my vulnerabilities. She'd studied my weaknesses like a military strategist and deployed them with surgical precision to inflict maximum damage. I thought about going to the police immediately. Creating and distributing explicit material to harass someone had to violate several state and federal laws. But as I sat there contemplating my options, trying to process the sheer scope of her malice, I remembered Theodore's voice during our last conversation. The pain of a father realizing his daughter had become someone he didn't recognize. I thought about Carmen's smug attitude, her admission that she'd orchestrated Vivian's public humiliation of me as some twisted power play. This video would destroy them both, but in very different ways. Theodore would be devastated to see what his daughter had become, while Carmen would face social and financial consequences she'd never anticipated. The religious community they were part of, the social standing Carmen valued so highly, the comfortable life Theodore had provided, all of it would disappear once the right people saw who Vivian really was. I'm not sure if I went extreme in this, but I made several copies of strategic portions of the video, nothing explicitly graphic that could get me in legal trouble, but enough to show what was happening and capture the audio of Vivian's final, cruel comment. Then I created anonymous email accounts using public computers and sent the clips to Theodore, Carmen, Nathan, and several of Vivian's close friends who still maintained social media connections with people I knew. The response was swift and more devastating than I could have imagined. Theodore completely lost it. Called me at 6 a.m. the next morning. I'd never heard a human being sound so completely broken, so utterly destroyed by what they discovered about someone they loved. "What has she become?" he whispered into the phone, his voice barely audible. "How did we raise someone capable of this kind of cruelty? Where did we go wrong?" Through his tears and broken sentences, he told me he'd been awake all night after receiving the video. Not just because of what it showed, but because it confirmed everything he'd started to realize about his wife's toxic influence on their daughter over the years. Carmen had been poison in their home for decades, systematically undermining his authority, manipulating their children, and turning their family into something ugly and dysfunctional. "I filed for divorce this morning," he said, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. 32 years of marriage, but I can't live with someone who turned our daughter into this monster. I'm cutting off Vivian's graduate school funding too. She's got one semester left, but she's about to learn what real consequences feel like. By noon, I was getting updates from mutual friends and former colleagues. Vivian had been frantically calling everyone in her contact list, trying to explain the video, claiming it was fake or taken out of context or somehow edited to make her look bad. But the audio was unmistakably her voice saying my name, and her friends weren't buying any of the desperate excuses. Several people who'd known us as a couple were horrified by the cruelty they'd witnessed. Carmen was in full panic mode because she'd never worked a legitimate job in her adult life and had no idea how to survive financially without Theodore's income. She'd spent decades as a professional housewife, using her husband's money to maintain her social status while manipulating everyone around her. Guess she never thought her husband might grow a spine one day. Vivian, meanwhile, was facing the immediate reality of her final semester of graduate school with no way to pay tuition, housing, or living expenses. But that wasn't even her biggest problem. Word travels fast in the finance world, and our industry is smaller than most people think. The restraining order filing was public record, and someone at her firm had done their homework. By the end of the week, she'd been quietly let go from her internship. Turns out financial firms don't like legal drama following their employees around, especially when it involves harassment and defamation claims. Without the internship, her chances of landing a decent job after graduation basically evaporated. Finance companies do background checks, and this kind of legal baggage was career poison. She was stuck trying to secure emergency student loans while working part-time at some coffee shop downtown. Brett got his own taste of consequences at our office. Management had been looking for reasons to get rid of him anyway. His gossip-spreading habit and general unprofessionalism had made him plenty of enemies over the years. The restraining order just gave them the excuse they needed. He was called into HR on a Friday afternoon and didn't come back Monday. Heard through the grapevine that they cited creating a hostile work environment, along with some performance issues they'd been documenting. The week after Brett got fired, I saw him at a gas station near the office. He looked like he'd aged 5 years unshaven, wearing wrinkled clothes, that defeated look of someone whose world had collapsed. He saw me too, started to say something, then thought better of it, and just walked away. Smart choice. The other day, I heard from Jake that Vivian has been showing up at Brett's apartment building, calling his work, basically stalking the guy. Even spotted her sitting in her car outside our office a couple times, probably hoping to catch him. Pathetic doesn't begin to cover it. Within a week, Theodore's divorce attorney had frozen all joint assets, and Vivian's comfortable suburban lifestyle came crashing down. They got evicted when Carmen couldn't make the mortgage payments. Last I heard, Carmen was working retail for the first time in her life, dealing with managers half her age telling her what to do. Vivian was bouncing between friends' couches, trying to finish her degree while working whatever part-time jobs she could find. 3 weeks later, Theodore called me one last time. His voice was completely different, stronger, more confident than I'd ever heard it. "I wanted to thank you for helping me see what my family had become. I've been weak for too many years, but I'm finding my strength again. There's a woman at church who understands faith and kindness. I'm remembering what healthy relationships actually look like. As for me, I'm doing better than I have in years. The workplace gossip died completely when Brett disappeared, and I've been seeing someone new, a woman who understands that trust is sacred and secrets aren't weapons. She knows about my condition, but she learned about it the right way, with understanding and acceptance. People ask if I feel guilty about what happened to them. Simple answer: you don't get to systematically destroy someone's trust and expect mercy when your actions have consequences. I didn't create that video. I didn't humiliate her at our engagement dinner. I didn't spread my private information around the workplace. I just made sure the right people saw who she really was. The restraining order is still active. Haven't heard from her in months. And oh, I kept my grandmother's ring. It's in my safe now, waiting for someone who actually deserves it. Now, Reddit, what do you think? Am I the one who sucks in here,